So welcome everybody. It's good to see you again this week. To start, wanted to give you all a couple updates as far as events go. I am working on a new event schedule. In the next few weeks, there will be a whole bunch of new events put up on community.saltstack.com. All of those should have topics and up-to-date Zoom URLs, up-to-date co-hosting privileges, all those sorts of things. So there's still some bugs we're working out on that end, but that's my main kind of housekeeping announcement that I have. We, of course, continue to stream everything on Twitch. The other thing is this week we hosted our first German meetup. We had 19 people attend the meetup, had a really good conversation on SaltStack between guardrails. And basically what happened is they spent an hour or so, Alias Probst did a talk, and then after that there was some open conversation and discussion. I know we're in the works in getting a couple other foreign language meetups up and running. I know one in France and I think Spain. I was talking to one of our people, so that's something that we will continue doing. So just keep up on community.saltstack.com. Once everything's fully up to date across there, across YouTube and across GitHub, I will let you know. Other than that, I think some of you saw on Monday I posted a what's happening this week sort of post in announcements. I'm also going to start having that live on the community wiki. Just kind of a one spot that everybody can go to and see what all's happening this week as far as events, the Twitch stream, as well as what the core team is focusing on, which might be helpful information for you all. That's also a good place for us to communicate SEPs that are open and SEPs that are closing so that you have time to look at those. So I'll be looking for that to happen every Monday, open hour agendas every Tuesday, and then Thursdays we have the open hours, so you can expect kind of at least those 3 days some regular communications as to what's going on around here. And then related to SEPs, on SEP number 28, we are on track to close that SEP. It's the one that deals with unsupported releases and a separate URL. Is there any feedback that anybody has on that? Kind of final thoughts, final words before we move forward to close that SEP? Okay, I'm going to take the silence as a no. It sounds like a lot of the conversations have been resolved in the comments, as well as in this meeting last week, but just kind of last call for notes. And I think that SEP is going to be merged today or tomorrow. I don't know exactly when, but plans to merge it today. Okay, and then the other SEP that we have, we wanted to bring up SEP number 28. That's the release label improvements. I will drop a link to that in both chats. I believe Wayne was going to lead that conversation, but just want to talk about this because it's also in its final comment period and we'd like to move forward with it.
Yeah, for sure. So this is a fairly basic improvement to our process. It's definitely not the be all end all, but we're just trying to make one small but easy adjustment, and that's to our labels. Right now, we have labels that are sometimes confusing because we have both a priority and a visibility. So you might have an issue that is labeled critical, but P4 because it causes data loss, but it's like happens in some weird corner case and nobody actually will see that that issue unless they do like a very specific thing while standing on their head and the moon aligns with Jupiter. All of these things might happen or have to happen before you can actually experience that issue. So that gets a little bit confusing. So we wanted to just kind of simplify the labels and make it much clearer what kind of what priorities would be for issues. So instead of seeing a critical P4, you're really just going to see one label that's that applies. So in the SEP, it spells out these different priorities and what they actually mean. So the highest priority are just issues that are severe enough to block a release. These should be fairly rare, but they'll be ones that affect most or all users within a particular area that cause data loss. They prevent Salt from starting or cause it to crash, or have other just really bad effects. And these will actually block a release and just say, okay, we've got to fix this before we actually release. But again, that should be fairly rare. Then the next highest priority is serious issues that aren't really serious enough to block a release. They might affect, they'll probably affect most people, at least within a particular area. They might cause data loss or crashes, but probably not quite that bad, especially if there's some kind of workaround to it. They wouldn't really be considered, it might be considered high. Then the next level down is issues that affect about half the people in a particular area, and they make, they'll produce incorrect functionality, bad functionality, confusing user experience, or a confusing error message. So these are things that, they'll have a workaround. It just may require doing something kind of completely different than you would expect. And those issues are going to be considered medium. And then the last priority is ones that are just like off in the corner in the weeds somewhere. They don't really affect many people, especially if there's a workaround in place or one that exists, or if it's just a cosmetic fix, adjusting a typo in an error message or something, or colors. Anything that's really just a cosmetic issue will be labeled with that low priority. So that's this SEP in a nutshell, is to eliminate any other labels and just consolidate them to those four: critical, high, medium, and low. And that should really simplify a lot in our triage process, as well as make it a lot clearer. When you're looking at an issue, can I expect this to be fixed soon, or could it be a while? If it's a low priority item, it may be a while. It may be something you'd want to pick up yourself and fix. But if it's a critical issue or a high issue, you can expect that that those issues should be fixed at least by the next release, especially the critical ones, and obviously, and then as many of the high priority items that we can get to. So that's that SEP in a nutshell. I guess back to you, Cassandra.
Okay. Does anybody have any input on the SEP? What are y'all's thoughts? Okay, what is our timeline to actually finalize that SEP? Do you have that?
That will be comment period 2 days ago, so it should be next Monday when that one gets finalized.
Okay, so June 1st.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, cool. We'll make sure that's in the notes and throw it out in the announcements as well. Go back to Twitch and see. What other comments or questions are there about that particular step? All right, the next up we have kind of the hot topic lately is pop build and salt bin. I know last week we had talked a little bit about that, and a couple people had requested that we do kind of a deep dive or more in-depth conversation about that. I don't see the person who requested that topic on the open hour this week, but we still want to kind of chat a little bit about it. So I think Tyler was going to go ahead and lead that.
Yeah, I was going to lead the discussion on pop build, which we are going to be renaming Tiamat after the goddess of the salt sea. It just made sense, and we needed a name besides pop build because it keeps getting confused with pop. But the goal of pop build is, or Tiamat as it will be called soon, is to package salt into a single binary. And the advantage of this is that we can, it doesn't matter what version of Python is on a target machine, it doesn't matter what version of any of the requirements are. With pop build, we can have all of those things be static. So it makes building salt a lot easier, and it makes it so that we can be sure what versions of dependencies will be on a target machine. So we're hoping pop build will make development easier, it'll make releases easier, and it'll make it it'll make deployment of salt a lot easier around the board. So that's my very brief overview of what pop build / Tiamat is. And if anyone has any questions, then want to open it up to everyone.
I have a question. How do you spell Tiamat?
Tiamat.
Thank you.
I thought Tiamat was like a
TIA.
D&D character that you destroy a dragon.
It is also a D&D king.
Oh.
And it was Tiamat.
Yeah. Yes. Google says, is Tiamat, when I typed it in, one of the second questions on Google was, is Tiamat a dragon?
I'd just like to add to what Tyler had said about pop build and salt bin and point out that it's been used for the last few months for some of the native minion builds where we're using salt minions on switch routers like Arista and Juniper and Cisco. And it's been, so it's been hammered out and tested in under limited conditions at certain sites. So it should be able to hit the ground running without too many surprises.
Where again was that being used so far?
Arista native minions at an IBM development that's ongoing at the moment. And also we have a Juniper native minion, which leverages pop build and salt bin with some modifications on a Juniper router. And that's undergoing certification and testing at the moment, which in conjunction with Juniper. And we have a Cisco one in development still in conjunction with Cisco. So it's actually been built and utilized. Some platforms are more further along than others, but the concept has been tested under fire, if I can put it that way, and it's used heavily.
Oh, so it's being used in the wild then.
Oh yes, but at limited sites. So it's not going to be something that's brand new, full of bugs. It's pretty solid at this point. And I just want to point that out. God, that's going to be terrible to type. Tiamat. Oh well, easy to say. Okay, that's me done. Unless somebody has questions.
There's a question about Pi2 support and deprecation.
Actually, since SaltBin is actually Pi3 self-contained, Python 3.7, and we use Python 3.7 because in conjunction with Cython and locale POSIX, it means we're able to use PEP 538 and 540, which gets us UTF support in those limited environments which only have C and POSIX locales. And so everything is self-contained, so the Pi2 deprecation in this case doesn't really become an issue. So if you had an environment that just had Python 2, like for example, an Arista switch, it works fine with no problems. But I'm sure somebody else meant other Pi2 deprecation sense of that part.
Yes. Okay, well, there's one more thing too about the people who are curious about pop build is that we, a couple months ago, Tom Hatch did a user group talk at the Python virtual meetup in Maryland. And that talk was an overview. It's up on our YouTube channel, and I just dropped a link to that YouTube video in the Slack or in the chats. Definitely check those out. And then if you have other questions, something we, are glad to talk about. Okay. And then we had a question in the chat from Twitch. Somebody said, by the way, Pi2 support needs to be clarified to the general user base. Deprecated in sodium has suddenly become dropped Pi2 like it's radioactive. And I suspect this hasn't been sufficiently announced. Releasing sodium without such clarification is going to cause an uproar with users who still weren't expecting it. I will say that we have been announcing this and discussing it
About a year now.
for quite some time. Yeah, for a year now. It's been in open hours. It's been in announcements. It's been
on the blog post.
On the blog posts. We just had a blog post about deprecation.
Open sub.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, it's been an ongoing conversation. But I'm not sure, maybe is there some outlet that we have missed communicating that message on, or something that people have in mind, some other way that we should be communicating that before the deprecation is complete? Was it done on the mailing list? Yes, it was.
Pull request to CPython, something that might like warn them about Python 2 being deprecated across the board. Potentially we could go back in time and do this last year at some point.
And if I can add, this is one of the issues that pop build is aiming to address, is that it doesn't matter what version of Python anyone has, because salt will be packaged with Python into a single binary.
If I can add one thing, I was wondering in the community, with Python 2 being end of life, do they think that people are going to still build Python 2 packages when it's already end of life? In that everybody in the industry is moving forward with Python 3 because Python 2 is end of life. And so it's kind of, why would you, I mean, we've had it announced in multiple places for over a year that this was Python 2 was being end of life because it's been end of life. And so we're moving forward with Pi 3 support only. And we're not removing Python 2isms out of the code. We're not going to rip everything apart, but we're slowly going to remove it over time as releases progress in the future. So I find it hard that people are expecting Python 2 to still be available when it is end of life in the industry.
we have another kind of elaboration on this. We've seen several cases where modules in Jinja are using Pi2 specific features which don't work without modification on Pi3. Salt itself will work, but people's installations might not.
Sounds
that
like we
does.
need to have some GitHub issues made for those specific instances so we can get them fixed.
Yeah. Would we be committing Daniel to fixing those before our sodium release?
It depends on what they are.
Yeah.
It's certainly a possibility.
Makes sense.
Yes, and they should be upgrading, but they haven't, and the concern was simply about shouting it loudly enough. I'm going to be a little blunt here and say that I feel like no matter how loud we shout something, people are going to miss that message. And right now we're in a cadence of any messages are shared across our main 3 channels, Slack, IRC, and Google groups / mailing list. We're trying to figure out how, because apparently we have audiences in Reddit and Stack Overflow that aren't even aware of some of the changes going on. So one thing that we're going to figure out is how to share that information with those audiences as well. But I feel like sometimes we could skywrite things and put signs on people's heads that say, hey, this thing is happening, and still somebody would miss it. Yes.
Yeah, of
RSS.
course,
We
I
do have
don't
an
think
RSS
that's-
feed.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole point about this Python 2 thing is if you've been running Python and you're running Python 2, every time you start it for the last year, you're getting a message saying this thing is this thing is no longer going to be supported.
Yeah.
So if you're still running it at that point, you're basically just ignoring all of the warning.
All of the warning signs. Yeah.
You can't get any more upfront and blatant than a message every time you start the interpreter.
Yeah. And Python 2 even extended their end of life for what was it, 5 years? So it's kind of feels like by this point, if you're still running Python 2, it's one of those things that just like, what what can I say at that point? It's definitely one thing for companies who are willing to pay somebody to backport that support, but definitely for people who are expecting, the Python Software Foundation to provide them free support for Python, like that's just silly. And I think the same thing goes for Salt. If somebody's expecting Salt to support Python 2 indefinitely for free, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't think anybody would want to do that, but maybe that's just me.
And I'm sure that as we get closer to actually implementing the deprecation, there will be more additional announcements, kind of a, hey, this is happening, this is the deadline, this is the date. So keep an eye out for all of that. And then it looks like we have a question in the, the Pi2 deprecation talk is kind of calm. I'm just checking both chats here. So it looks like we have a question now in the Zoom chat that says, how would pop build solve external states, library dependency like Elasticsearch, etc.?
You can still do a pip install into the pop build environment. So if you need to install extra dependencies, it's just a pip install away.
That answer your question? You're welcome. All right, the deadline is the sodium release. Yes, that's true. Yeah, somebody in the Twitch chat pointed out that the deadline for the deprecation is the sodium release. That is correct. Okay. What else does everybody have that they might want to bring up or discuss? That's it for our official agenda. Sort of happy to continue conversations about any of these things. Oh, another question. Is it possible to add the dependencies into the pop build process by the time salt from pop build starts? Can it have its dependencies installed?
So do you mean like the third-party dependencies or the underlying libraries?
Yes.
I will turn that over to somebody who knows a little bit more about the pop build salt, but
Yeah, I mean, if you do the pip install into the environment, it's there. So when salt starts, it's available right away. I'm not 100% following the question. So
if you're referring to the hard dependencies for salt, I believe those should be included in the pop build. But for like other dependencies, like for instance Postgres, right? That's not a hard dependency for salt, or MySQL. Those are optional dependencies. So the hard dependencies, as far as I'm aware, those should be included in the pop build installation, but those third-party dependencies can still be installed into a pop build of salt.
Yeah. If I can give an example for the native minion for Arista, we included a PyE API as a dependency that's built in because it's native minion for Arista. It made sense to have PyE API available from the get-go, and it was requested from Arista that we build it in, and it was just as simple included in the build, just PyE API, and away it gets installed, and it's self-contained. Everything worked. So there is the ability with SaltBin when we're building to include more dependencies that are pre-built into it than we currently do, because it's so simple in SaltBin to do that. Now, as to what that list dependency should be, I'm sure we could all have discussion about who wants what. For example, though, things like a database might not be the best thing to add into everything, because you've got to consider the question of bloat for stuff that isn't going to be universally wanted by everybody. But it is very easy to just pip install into the SaltBin environment and have it automatically added in. And it is also possible to build SaltBin with some external dependencies, like, for example, libsodium, which are C binaries, so that they get bundled along with it at the time that the self-contained package is done. And again, we could have a discussion as to what are those requirements that everybody is going to make available, rather than saddling somebody with something that only maybe 10% of the people really want.
Yeah, thanks, Al. That answers it for me. I just realized I'm not like on a bus or anything, so it's cool. I can actually talk to you now. I had tried playing around with SaltBin a couple of months back, and there were various require files where you could include whatever dependencies you needed. But at the time, it didn't seem like those dependencies were being honored. So you could install, say, AWS library for Bodo something or other, and Salt would start up and not have that thing. And because you could end up with the occasional bootstrapping problem of, I need this thing to get access to something. So in those environments, it would just be helpful to document whatever the process is for SaltBin in case people need to build their own salt binaries that do include all of the bells and whistles they need for that particular environment.
Yeah, the doc is a work in progress, like SaltBin is at times. And with pop build, like it getting renamed to Tiamat. I just found that out today too. So as it is more mature, the documentation will catch up and document those And it is in the salt bin requirements, not the salt requirements, that those dependencies are added. So, excuse me, we can basically take the regular salt and we bring that in like a dependency like the other dependencies. So there's a requirements file in salt bin that those dependencies get added to, not the salt itself requirements.
I guess it might also be a good thing to point the documentation working group at Salt Bin or now Tiamat, so that we can be aware of that and make sure that that's on our agenda, and that we're able to help work with the documentation and make sure that documentation doesn't get too stale.
We do have another question from Twitch. Somebody's asking for clarification. They asked, so could we create our own installation packages to include those extra dependencies rather than needing to install them to each minion after salt has been installed?
If I understand correctly, David, that's a thing that can be done. Somebody can, if they want, they can do their own pop build or Tiamat build of salt bin, and say, okay, instead of the standard dependencies, I would like XYZ to go along with that, and then they could use that salt bin to install their minions from.
That is correct. Salt bin is an open source project, so is what's now called Tiamat. One is on GitLab, and we've talked about moving salt bin to GitLab. I don't see any reason why it needs to stay on GitHub. Like a number of new things, they've been moved to GitLab, and the plans are that we will at some point. I don't know when yet, though. Probably after we get the release out for Sodium. But essentially, people can fork that and build their own version that's self-contained with salt and the dependencies that they want, and take care of it themselves. There's absolutely no reason why somebody couldn't do that. Somebody could do that with salt at the moment if they wanted to. Packaging is a little harder because you have all the different platforms, RPMs and Debian packages, etc. But with SaltBin, you can actually take that away and create your own executable, self-contained version of Salt without very much trouble at all. In my experience, the hardest part has been getting Python 3.7 installed on some very old OSs and hardware. As you might imagine, switches don't exactly have the latest OS running them, since they tend to pick an OS and stay with it for an awful long time. And it works in 32-bit and 64-bit environments, so that isn't a limitation at all. Just depends on the platform that you're building on top of. But yeah, you can do your own fork, build your own version with your own dependencies, and away you go. Are there any other questions about SaltBin?
I do not see any other questions about Saltbin. I do see talk of goddesses and dragons in the chat over Tiamat. Oh, okay, let's see. Will users be able to use Tiamat to build on Windows as well as Linux platforms? That's a yes, I would imagine.
Eventually. It's not there yet
Eventually.
on Windows. I think it's set to actually build an MSI in Windows. So let's create an MSI.
Okay. Does anybody else have additional questions or things that they'd like to know about? This? No? Okay. Any additional topics on anybody's mind? Oh, will these? Oh, we might have another question coming in. What's the status of PyTest deployment? New question.
I can talk about that. So, as it stands today, the master branch has one test failure under PyTest, which doesn't happen under run tests. The reason being that we don't actually test that test case using run tests. We were skipping it because on Windows we actually have a whitelist of tests to test against. There's a PR to fix that. It might get into Sodium or not, but PyTest is up to par with runtests.py. The reason why we haven't switched is because it was getting ready pretty close to the release, and we actually want to have both running at the same time, like we have today, for a couple of weeks, just to make sure that the results of runtests.py are the same as pytest.py. And most likely, when we get out of code freeze, we will be ready to make the full switch and deprecate and remove the run test stuff. But the groundwork to run the full test suite and have it passing is done.
Okay, another question that I'm assuming is related to pop build, and somebody wants to know if those builds will support silent installs.
Haven't thought of it, but there shouldn't be any reason why we can't do that. Currently, everything I'm doing, I'm looking at what I'm doing. So I hadn't thought about silent builds and silent installs. But the way that we've got the current packages on RPMs, if you can silent install an RPM, then we shouldn't have any problems.
Linux should be the same. Is Windows any different with the silent install for the Windows installer?
It should be easy to add into the MSI script. If they use the one in the Salt Windows MSI repo, that's built into that one right now. We're bundling MSI for Sodium. Those should be available in the RC when we release that. And they have a silent install option. You can set all the settings with the command line and everything and install it silently.
Okay, I see no more questions in any chats. So I guess we will wrap it up for the week. Thank you all for joining me. As always, please submit topic requests to me, bring your questions here. This is a real good discussion. I was just telling somebody that these open hours have gotten so active that I now need to rewatch the videos to take notes and update the notes on the community wiki. So that means that the notes will probably be up on Fridays moving forward so that I can listen back and make sure I'm recording all the information for those who couldn't attend. And we do have one last question. The Windows tests being skipped, will those be addressed soon in quote marks?
The reason why the Windows tests are being skipped is because Windows began being a first-class citizen way after Linux was. And we have quite a few tests that A, should not run on Windows, and we don't have the necessary skips in place. Or B, they simply fail on Windows and we must address them. After we switch to PyTest, it will be easier to add skips and markers to handle all of that. And eventually we will get through the whole test suite and define what applies to Windows or not, and stop relying on a whitelist.
Did that give you the clarification you needed? All right, great. On that note, thanks for joining me. Again, thanks for conversation, for participating. I know up next for the people who are on Twitch, we have Tyler's going to be popping on there in a little bit, I think at 2 p.m. Eastern, so it'll be noon Mountain. And the Twitch streams are continuing on a daily basis as well. So with that, I will talk to you all later and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.